The emergency call came through at 9:47 p.m. on a humid Tuesday night in late May 2024. The dispatcher's voice remained steady as she typed the address into the system, but the screaming in the background made her fingers tremble. Children, multiple children, their voices high and fractured with terror. The caller, a neighbor from 3 houses down, could barely form coherent sentences. Gunshots. A woman down. Kids trapped inside. The address was on Pelican Bay Court, a quiet cul-de-sac in Deltona, Florida, where families barbecued on weekends and Halloween decorations stayed up until Thanksgiving. Within 4 minutes, 2 Volusia County Sheriff's patrol cars skidded onto the street, their headlights cutting through the thick Florida darkness. The humid air smelled like jasmine and gunpowder. Officers found the front door hanging open, its frame splintered near the lock. Inside the living room, 4 children huddled together on a couch, the oldest girl clutching the youngest against her chest. Their eyes were wide but dry, shock holding back the tears that would come later. None of them spoke. They simply pointed toward the back door. In the small fenced yard behind the house, deputies discovered the body of 31-year-old Marina Castellanos. She lay face down near a plastic playhouse, her arms stretched toward the back gate as though she'd been trying to reach it. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the St. Augustine grass her husband had mowed just 2 days earlier. The medical examiner would later count 7 gunshot wounds, 3 of them fatal. Her cell phone lay shattered beside her, the screen still glowing with an unsent text message that read, "Please don't do this." Marina had been a surgical nurse at Halifax Health Medical Center in Daytona Beach, known among colleagues for arriving early and staying late. She worked the overnight shift 3 times a week, coming home at dawn to make breakfast for her children before they left for school. Her co-workers described her as tireless, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and never complained about double shifts. Outside the hospital, she was a devoted mother to 4 kids, ranging from 13 down to 5 years old. Friends said she lived for them, organizing beach trips to New Smyrna on her days off and coaching her daughter's soccer team, despite having no athletic background herself. But those who knew her well had noticed changes in recent months. Marina had grown quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped posting photos on social media, something she had done religiously since her oldest was born. At work, she began taking her lunch breaks alone in her car, rather than joining the other nurses in the break room. When asked if everything was okay at home, she would smile and change the subject. Her sister, Elena, later told investigators that Marina had confided in her just 2 weeks before her death. The marriage was falling apart. She had discovered something about her husband, something she described as unforgivable, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. The husband's name was Gabriel Reyes, though everyone called him Gabe. At 34, he worked as a diesel mechanic at a trucking company off Interstate 4, a job that kept him out of the house for long stretches. He was a big man, 6'2", with tattooed forearms and a beard he kept trimmed close. To neighbors, he seemed friendly enough, the type who waved from his driveway and helped jump-start dead batteries. But there were moments when his demeanor shifted, when his smile dropped and something harder emerged in his eyes. The couple had been married for 12 years, together since Marina was 19 and working her first nursing assistant job at a rehabilitation center in D-Land. Their relationship had always been intense. Friends from the early years remembered passionate arguments followed by equally passionate reconciliations. Gabe was possessive, constantly checking in on Marina, showing up at her workplace unannounced, questioning her about male co-workers. She brushed it off as protectiveness back then, even found it flattering in a way. But over time, the protectiveness morphed into control. He monitored her phone, demanded passwords to her social media accounts, and questioned why she needed to go anywhere without him. Marina adapted, learned to navigate around his moods, kept peace for the sake of the children. Then, in March 2024, everything changed. Marina discovered text messages on Gabe's phone, messages that revealed a secret he had been guarding with violence-level intensity. He was involved with other men, meeting them through discreet apps, maintaining relationships he had hidden for years behind the facade of a traditional marriage. For Gabe, a man who prided himself on a certain image within his community and workplace, this secret was the foundation of his entire identity. Exposure meant destruction, not just of his marriage, but of the persona he had carefully constructed. When Marina confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he begged. He promised it meant nothing, that it was just confusion, a phase he would work through. He swore he loved her, loved their family, and would do anything to keep them together. Marina wanted to believe him. She wanted to think that 12 years and 4 children counted for something. But trust, once shattered, doesn't heal with promises. She told her sister she felt trapped between staying for the children and leaving for her own sanity. Elena urged her to leave, even offered to let her and the kids stay at her house in Orlando until Marina figured things out. But Marina hesitated. Leaving meant lawyers, custody battles, splitting the kids between 2 homes. It meant admitting failure to her parents, who had warned her about marrying so young. It meant starting over at 31, with 4 children and a nursing salary that barely covered daycare costs. So she stayed, hoping they could somehow move forward. Gabe interpreted her staying as forgiveness, as permission to pretend nothing had changed. But Marina had changed. She started documenting things, taking screenshots, writing down dates and details. She was building a case, preparing for the moment when she would finally have the courage to walk away. That courage arrived on May 21st, 2024, when Marina discovered Gabe had lied again. He had promised to end all outside contact, to focus on their family. But she found new messages, new lies, proof that nothing had changed except his ability to hide it better. She confronted him that afternoon after he returned from work. The children were home, doing homework and watching television in the adjacent rooms. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, the sound of something breaking, then a brief, terrible silence before the gunshots began. Gabe had retrieved his Glock 19 from the safe in their bedroom closet. A gun he kept for home protection, he always said. Marina ran. She made it out the back door, across the small yard, almost to the gate that led to the alley behind their house. Almost to safety, but Gabe was faster. He fired repeatedly, emptying the magazine into her back as she fell. Then he stood over her, reloaded, and fired 3 more times. The children heard everything. The oldest daughter, 13-year-old Isabella, called 911 while herding her younger siblings into the living room. Her voice on the recording is unnaturally calm, the kind of calm that comes from dissociation, from a mind protecting itself by shutting down. By the time deputies arrived, Gabe was gone. He had fled in his pickup truck, leaving the gun on the kitchen counter beside a half-eaten sandwich. A manhunt began immediately, spreading across Volusia County and into neighboring Seminole and Orange counties. His photo appeared on local news channels within an hour, accompanied by warnings that he was armed and dangerous. Tips poured in, sightings reported from Sanford to St. Augustine, but none led anywhere. Gabe knew the back roads, the places where someone could disappear in Florida's sprawling suburban sprawl. Marina's family gathered at the hospital where she had worked, then at Elena's house, when there was nothing left to do but plan a funeral. Her parents, immigrants from Colombia who had built a life in Central Florida through decades of hard work, sat in stunned silence. Her father kept asking why nobody had stopped it, why the police hadn't done something before it was too late. But there had been no restraining order, no police reports, nothing on record to indicate the level of danger Marina had been in. She had kept her suffering private, believing she could manage it, believing she could protect her children by keeping the family together. The funeral took place on a Saturday afternoon at a small Catholic church in D-Land. Hundreds attended, nurses in scrubs, standing alongside neighbors and family friends. The children sat in the front row, dressed in clothes their aunt had bought the day before. They didn't cry during the service. They simply stared ahead, holding hands, while the priest spoke about mercy and eternal rest. Outside, news cameras filmed from a respectful distance, and reporters asked anyone who would talk about the woman who had been killed and the man who had done it. As Marina was laid to rest in a cemetery overlooking a man-made lake, investigators continued searching for Gabe. They tracked his phone, monitored his bank accounts, staked out the homes of relatives and friends. But he had vanished completely, leaving behind only the wreckage of a family destroyed by secrets and shame. And though nobody knew it yet, his violence was far from over. The rage that had taken Marina's life was still burning, and it would soon find another target. Someone who had been there for Marina, who had urged her to leave, who represented everything Gabe blamed for his exposure. Her name was Elena Castellanos, and she had 3 months left to live. The manhunt for Gabriel Reyes consumed the Volusia County Sheriff's Office for the first 72 hours after Marina's murder. Detective Sarah Brennan, a 15-year veteran of the department's homicide unit, led the investigation. She had worked domestic violence cases before, too many of them, and recognized the pattern immediately. Men like Gabe didn't just kill once and disappear into remorse. They killed to silence, to punish, to reclaim control they believed had been stolen from them. And when that control remained out of reach, they expanded their list of targets. Brennan's first priority was protecting Marina's family, particularly Elena Castellanos. At 35, Elena was 4 years older than her sister had been, and the two had shared a bond that went beyond typical sibling relationships. After their parents immigrated from Barranquilla in the late 80s, the sisters had relied on each other through the challenges of growing up between two cultures. Elena had been the first to learn English, translating for their parents at parent-teacher conferences and doctor's appointments. Marina had been the risk-taker, the one who pursued nursing school, while Elena took the safer route into office administration. Elena lived in Orlando with her husband, Marco, and their 2 teenage sons in a ranch-style home near Lake Nona. She worked as an operations manager for a medical supply company, a job that kept her busy but allowed her to maintain the work-life balance Marina had always struggled to find. In the weeks before the murder, Elena had become Marina's confidant and escape plan. She had offered her home as a refuge, promised to help with childcare, even consulted with a family law attorney on Marina's behalf. When the call came that Tuesday night in May, Elena had been in her kitchen preparing lunch for the next day, and the sound that came out of her when she learned her sister was dead brought her husband running from the garage. Detective Brennan visited Elena 3 days after the funeral. The house was full of relatives, cousins and aunts, moving through rooms with casserole dishes and hushed conversations. Elena sat in the living room, her face puffy from crying, but her posture rigid with anger. Brennan explained the situation carefully. Gabe remained at large. His truck had been found abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Kissimmee, but surveillance footage showed him getting into another vehicle, possibly with someone helping him. Without knowing where he had gone or who was assisting him, the department couldn't guarantee Elena's safety. Elena listened, then asked the question Brennan had been dreading. "Do you think he'll come after me?" Brennan didn't sugarcoat it. Gabe had to know that Elena had encouraged Marina to leave. He had to know about the conversations, the plans, the attorney consultations. In his mind, Elena wasn't just a sister-in-law. She was an enemy, someone who had tried to destroy his family. The psychology was clear. Men who kill their partners often target those they perceive as accomplices to their humiliation. Brennan recommended a protection detail, but budget constraints and jurisdictional issues made it complicated. Instead, she advised Elena to vary her routines, avoid being alone, and consider staying somewhere Gabe wouldn't think to look. But Elena refused to hide. She had 4 of Marina's children living with her now, along with her own 2 sons. 6 kids total, ranging from 5 to 16, all traumatized and grieving. She couldn't uproot them again, couldn't ask them to live in fear on top of everything else. Marco supported her decision, but took his own precautions. He installed security cameras around the property, reinforced the locks on all doors, and retrieved his shotgun from storage. At night, he barely slept, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Meanwhile, Gabe moved through central Florida like a ghost. Investigators later pieced together his movements through security footage and witness statements, but in real time, he stayed 2 steps ahead. He crashed with old friends from his mechanic days, people who didn't ask questions and didn't watch the news closely. He changed his appearance, shaving his beard and cutting his hair short. He paid for everything in cash, using money he had withdrawn from their joint account in the hours after the murder. And he watched. He monitored social media, tracked his children's location through a family-sharing app Marina had never thought to remove him from, and studied the routines of everyone connected to his former life. During those weeks, Elena threw herself into caring for the children. She enrolled Marina's kids in grief counseling, coordinated with their schools to ensure they didn't fall behind academically, and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. On weekends, she took all 6 children to the beach, to theme parks, anywhere that might distract them from the horror they had witnessed. She documented everything in a journal, writing letters to Marina that she would never send, pouring out her rage and sorrow onto pages she kept hidden in her nightstand. The community rallied around the family. Marina's co-workers at Halifax Health organized fundraisers to help cover funeral costs and support the children. Local churches provided meals and childcare. Strangers donated money through online crowdfunding pages, moved by the story of 4 children who had lost their mother to violence. But beneath the outpouring of support, Elena felt a growing unease. She caught herself checking the rearview mirror obsessively while driving, studying faces in parking lots, flinching at unexpected sounds. Marco noticed, too, how she kept her phone within reach at all times, how she stopped sitting near windows. In late June, exactly 5 weeks after Marina's murder, Elena received a text from an unknown number. It contained no words, just a photograph. The image showed the outside of her house, taken from the street, time-stamped from earlier that morning. Elena's hands shook as she forwarded it to Detective Brennan. The number was a burner phone, untraceable, purchased with cash at a convenience store in Altamonte Springs. The message was clear. Gabe knew where she was. He was watching, and he wanted her to know it. Brennan pushed for increased patrols in Elena's neighborhood, but resources were stretched thin across multiple active investigations. The best they could offer was periodic drive-bys and a direct line to dispatch. Marco considered moving the family to a hotel, but Elena refused again. Running felt like giving Gabe exactly what he wanted, proof that he still controlled their lives, even from hiding. Instead, she became hypervigilant, installing a panic button app on her phone and teaching the older children what to do in an emergency. July arrived with punishing heat and afternoon thunderstorms that did little to cool the air. The children adapted to their new reality with the resilience unique to youth, though nightmares plagued them all. Isabella, Marina's oldest, had stopped speaking entirely except when directly addressed. The youngest, 5-year-old Sophia, had regressed, wetting the bed and refusing to sleep without every light in the house turned on. Eleanor held them through the worst nights, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep, telling them they were safe even as her own fear grew. On July 29th, 3 months and 8 days after Marina's death, Elena dropped the kids at a summer camp program run by their church. It was a Monday morning, bright and hot, the kind of day where the asphalt shimmered with heat mirages. She had a rare day off work and planned to use it running errands, grocery shopping, picking up prescriptions. Mundane tasks that felt almost normal. She texted Marco at 10:15 a.m., letting him know she was heading to Target. He responded with a heart emoji and a reminder to grab more sunscreen for the beach trip they had planned for the weekend. Elena never made it to Target. Security footage from a gas station on Narcousie Road showed her Nissan Pathfinder pulling in at 10:47 a.m. She went inside, purchased a bottle of water and a pack of gum, then returned to her vehicle. As she opened the driver's side door, a man approached from behind. The footage, grainy and shot from a high angle, showed a brief interaction. The man wore a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Elena appeared to recognize him. Her body language shifted from casual to rigid in an instant. She stepped back, hands raised in a defensive gesture. The man reached for her. She tried to run. He grabbed her arm, forced her toward a white panel van parked 2 spots away. She fought, her mouth open in what must have been a scream. But the gas station was located on a busy commercial strip where traffic noise drowned out everything. The entire abduction took less than 90 seconds. The van's side door slid open. The man shoved Elena inside. The door closed. Both vehicles left the parking lot within seconds of each other, heading in opposite directions. A witness, an elderly woman pumping gas on the other side of the lot, noticed something seemed wrong, but couldn't articulate exactly what. By the time she mentioned it to the cashier inside, both vehicles were long gone. It would be another 4 hours before Marco, unable to reach his wife and growing concerned, called the police to report her missing. Marco Castellanos made the call to 911 at 3:22 p.m. His voice cracked as he explained that his wife had been missing for over 4 hours, hadn't responded to texts or calls, and her last known location showed her phone had gone dark near a gas station on Narcoosee Road. The dispatcher tried to calm him, explaining that adults were often late, that phones died, that there were reasonable explanations. But Marco cut her off. His wife was the sister of a murder victim. The killer was still at large. This wasn't a woman running late from errands. This was an abduction. Detective Brennan received the alert within minutes and felt her stomach drop. She had warned Elena. She had pushed for protection. And now the worst-case scenario was unfolding exactly as she had feared. She mobilized immediately, dispatching units to the gas station, while pulling security footage from every camera within a 2-mile radius. By 5 p.m., she had confirmed what Marco already knew in his gut. Elena had been taken, and the man who took her matched Gabriel Reyes's new appearance. The white panel van became the focus of an intensive search. Traffic cameras tracked it heading south on Narcoosee, then west on State Road 528 toward the Beachline Expressway. After that, it vanished. No toll booth captured the license plate clearly enough to read. No business cameras picked it up. Gabe had chosen his route carefully, avoiding main thoroughfares once he had Elena secured. Brennan knew they were working against a ticking clock. Statistics showed that abduction victims had the highest survival rate within the first 3 hours. They were now past 5. The investigation expanded rapidly. FBI agents joined local law enforcement, bringing resources and expertise in kidnapping cases. They set up a command center at the Orange County Sheriff's Office, covering walls with maps, timelines, and photographs. Marco sat in a conference room, answering the same questions repeatedly while trying to reach relatives who could pick up the children from camp. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold his phone. Detective Brennan sat beside him, her presence both professional and deeply personal. She had failed to protect Marina. She would not fail Elena, too. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed Elena's abandoned Pathfinder, still parked at the gas station. They found her purse on the driver's seat, wallet intact, phone lying on the floorboard with a cracked screen. The driver's side door had been left open, keys still in the ignition. It painted a picture of someone interrupted mid-action, someone who had no time to grab anything before being forced away. Witnesses from nearby businesses were interviewed, but the lunch rush had kept most people too distracted to notice the abduction. The elderly woman who had felt something was wrong couldn't provide details beyond a vague description that matched thousands of men. As darkness fell over central Florida, Elena remained missing. News stations ran breaking coverage, displaying both her photo and Gabe's side by side, pleading for information from the public. The tip line lit up with calls, most useless, some promising. A woman in Kissimmee reported seeing a white van parked outside an abandoned warehouse. A man in Cocoa claimed his neighbor matched Gabe's description and had been acting suspicious. Each lead was investigated, Each one led nowhere. Gabe had planned this carefully, selecting a location remote enough to avoid detection, but accessible enough to reach quickly. The truth was darker than anyone searching could have imagined. Gabe had taken Elena to a foreclosed property in rural Brevard County, a house that had sat empty for 2 years after the previous owners walked away during the housing crisis. The property sat on 5 acres of scrubland, surrounded by palmetto bushes and pine trees, invisible from the nearest road. Gabe had discovered it months earlier while doing side work for a real estate investor. He had kept a key, recognizing it as the perfect place to disappear if things went wrong. And things had gone catastrophically wrong. Inside the abandoned house, Eleanor was bound to a chair in what had once been a dining room. Duct tape covered her mouth. Her wrists bled, where plastic zip ties cut into skin. Gabe paced in front of her, his eyes wild, his movements erratic. He talked constantly, a rambling monologue that shifted between accusation and justification. He blamed Elena for poisoning Marina against him. He blamed Marina for not understanding him. He blamed society for making him hide who he was. The logic spiraled, contradictory and unhinged. The reasoning of a man whose entire identity had collapsed and reformed around a single narrative of victimhood. Elena's eyes followed him, calculating, searching for any opportunity. She knew her sister's fate. She knew Gabe had no intention of letting her go. But survival instinct pushed against despair. Her children needed her. Marina's children needed her. She forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose, to stay calm, to think. The house was old, the windows broken in places, the back door hanging loose on rusted hinges. If she could get free, if she could run, she might have a chance in the surrounding wilderness. But Gabe was watching too closely. He had brought supplies, water, energy bars, zip ties, and his Glock 19, freshly reloaded. He had also brought gasoline, 5 red containers stacked in the kitchen, their purpose ominously clear. This wasn't about negotiation or ransom. This was about punishment, about making Elena pay for her role in his exposure, about ensuring that if he couldn't have his life back, nobody else would have theirs either. Hours passed in that house. Outside, search helicopters crisscrossed the night sky, their spotlights sweeping across highways and wooded areas. K9 units tracked scents that went cold at parking lots. Detectives interviewed everyone who had ever known Gabe, pressing them about possible hideouts or accomplices, but Central Florida's sprawl worked in his favor. Thousands of abandoned properties dotted the region, foreclosures and vacant lots where someone could hide for weeks without discovery. At 2 a.m., Marco finally returned home to face 6 children who knew something terrible had happened but didn't understand what. His own sons, 16 and 14, tried to stay strong for their younger cousins. But Isabella, who had already watched one parent destroy another, sat in the corner of the living room with her knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly, her eyes unfocused. She knew, somehow, she knew this story didn't have a happy ending. Detective Brennan worked through the night, sustained by coffee and mounting dread. She reviewed everything they knew about Gabe, his work history, his associates, his habits. She studied maps of properties he had access to through his employment. She consulted with psychologists who specialized in family annihilators, men who killed not out of passion, but out of a twisted sense of justice. They all agreed on one thing. Time was running out. Gabe's rage had been building for 3 months. Whatever he planned to do, he would do it soon. Dawn broke humid and gray on July 30th. Eleanor had been missing for 18 hours. In the foreclosed house, Gabe stopped pacing. He looked at Elena with an expression that mixed hatred and something that might have been regret. He removed the tape from her mouth, not out of mercy, but because he wanted her to speak, wanted her to understand why this was happening. Elena, her voice hoarse, asked only one question. What about the children? Gabe's face hardened. The children, he said, would learn the truth about their mother. They would learn what happens when someone destroys a family. Then he picked up the first container of gasoline and began pouring it across the floor. The smell of gasoline filled the abandoned house, acrid and overwhelming. Elena watched as Gabe methodically poured fuel across the warped hardwood floors, creating a trail that led from the dining room, where she sat bound, through the hallway and into what remained of the kitchen. Her mind raced through possibilities. She had perhaps minutes before he struck a match, minutes to say something that might pierce through his rage and delusion. But what could she say to a man who had already killed once and clearly intended to do so again? She tried anyway. Her voice came out steady despite the terror coursing through her. She told him the children loved him, that they asked about him, that destroying himself wouldn't undo what had already happened. Gabe paused, the empty gasoline container hanging from his hand. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something that might have been pain or doubt. Then it vanished, replaced by the cold certainty of someone who had moved beyond reason into pure, destructive intent. He told her it was too late for any of that. Marina had made her choice. Elena had helped her make it. Now everyone would live with the consequences. But what Gabe didn't know was that the property wasn't as isolated as he believed. A quarter-mile through the scrub, an elderly man named Robert Chen lived in a double-wide trailer on his own 5-acre parcel. Robert was a retired aerospace engineer who had moved to Florida for the quiet and cheap land. He kept to himself mostly, spending his days tinkering with ham radios and monitoring police scanners, a hobby he had maintained since his youth. The previous night, he had heard the unusual sound of a vehicle on the overgrown access road that led past his property. In rural Brevard County, where neighbors were spread far apart, any vehicle was notable. One passing at midnight was worth remembering. When Robert heard the morning news report about the missing woman and the white van, something clicked. He called the FBI tip line at 6:45 a.m., describing what he had heard and providing exact directions to the abandoned property. The operator flagged it as high priority. Detective Brennan received the information within 10 minutes and mobilized every available unit. Tactical teams from both the FBI and Brevard County Sheriff's Office converged on the location, approaching with extreme caution. They knew Gabe was armed. They knew he had nothing left to lose. At 7:33 a.m., SWAT units positioned themselves around the foreclosed property. Through broken windows, they could see movement inside and smell the gasoline fumes. The incident commander, a veteran FBI agent named Torres, established a perimeter and attempted phone contact. Gabe's cell phone, which he had kept off for weeks, suddenly showed active. Torres called it. Inside the house, the ringtone echoed. Gabe looked at the screen, saw the unknown number, and answered. His voice sounded eerily calm as he told Torres exactly what was about to happen. He was going to light the house on fire with Elena inside. Then he was going to shoot himself. There would be no negotiation, no surrender, no walking away. Torres kept him talking, employing every technique he had learned in hostage negotiation training. He acknowledged Gabe's pain, validated his feelings of betrayal, tried to build rapport. But Gabe wasn't interested in connection. He had called his own ending and was determined to see it through. As Torres talked, tactical team members crept closer to the structure, studying sightlines and entry points. The house's deteriorated condition worked in their favor. Walls had gaps, doors hung loose, and years of neglect had created multiple potential access routes. Inside, Elena had been working on her restraints since Gabe became distracted by the phone call. The zip ties were industrial strength, designed to be unbreakable, but the chair she was bound to was old and weakened by moisture and termites. She rocked slowly, testing the joints, feeling the wood creak beneath her weight. One of the chair legs felt loose where it connected to the seat. If she could break it free, she might be able to slip her bound hands underneath and in front of her. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all she had left. Gabe ended the call abruptly. He looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't read, something between regret and resolve. He pulled a lighter from his pocket, the cheap plastic kind sold at gas stations. Elena stopped moving, her breath catching. This was the moment. She thought of Marco, of her sons, of her sister's children who needed her. She thought of Marina and wondered if her sister had felt this same terrible clarity in her final seconds. This understanding that life was about to end, not peacefully, but violently and unfairly. But as Gabe flicked the lighter, the back door of the house exploded inward. FBI agents poured through, weapons raised, commands shouting overlapping commands. Gabe spun toward them, the lighter falling from his hand, his other hand reaching for the Glock tucked in his waistband. Everything happened in compressed time. An agent fired. The shot hit Gabe in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He fell against the gasoline-soaked wall, his gun clattering across the floor. More agents rushed forward, kicking the weapon away, forcing him onto his stomach, securing his hands behind his back. Other agents reached Elena, cutting her restraints with tactical knives, lifting her from the chair that had nearly become her funeral pyre. She couldn't stand at first. Her legs had gone numb from restricted circulation. 2 agents supported her as they moved her quickly out of the house and away from the gasoline fumes that could ignite from any spark. Outside, the morning sun felt impossibly bright. Paramedics surrounded her immediately, checking vitals, wrapping her wrists, offering water she couldn't swallow because her throat had closed with shock and relief. Gabe was dragged from the house bleeding but alive. Paramedics worked on his shoulder wound, while deputies secured him with additional restraints. He said nothing, his eyes vacant, his body limp. The fire he had intended to start never ignited. The execution he had planned for Elena never occurred. The suicide that would have been his final act of control never happened. Instead, he would face the legal system, face trial, face the families he had destroyed. Detective Brennan arrived as Elena was being loaded into an ambulance. Their eyes met across the chaos of emergency vehicles and personnel. No words were necessary. They both understood how close it had come, how many things had to align perfectly for Elena to survive. Robert Chen's insomnia and police scanner hobby, Torres's negotiation skills, buying precious minutes, the tactical team's precision entry. Any one element missing, and the outcome would have been different. At the hospital, Marco burst through emergency room doors with barely contained panic. When he saw Elena alive, conscious, talking to doctors, he collapsed into a chair and sobbed. The children couldn't visit yet. Hospital policy prevented it until she was stabilized, but Elena recorded a video message on a nurse's phone. She told them she was okay, that she loved them, that she would be home soon. When the 6 children watched it together in Marco's living room, Isabella finally cried, the tears she had been holding for 3 months pouring out in great heaving sobs. Her younger cousins joined her, all of them piled together on the couch, mourning and celebrating simultaneously. News of Elena's rescue spread rapidly. Media outlets that had been covering the manhunt since Marina's murder now reported the dramatic conclusion. But for those directly involved, the nightmare wasn't over. It was simply entering a new phase, one that involved courtrooms and testimony rather than searches and surveillance. Gabriel Reyes would face justice, but that justice would require Elena to relive her trauma repeatedly, to describe in detail what he had done and intended to do. The legal system demanded it, and she would comply because Marina deserved it, because the children deserved it, because speaking truth to power was the only weapon victims ever truly possessed. Gabriel Reyes was formally charged on August 2, 2024, with first-degree murder in Marina's death, kidnapping with intent to commit murder in Elena's abduction, and multiple weapons violations. The charges carried potential sentences that would ensure he never walked free again. His arraignment took place via video link from the Brevard County Jail, where he was being held without bond. He appeared on screen wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wounded shoulder bandaged, his expression blank. When the judge asked how he pleaded, his court-appointed attorney entered not guilty pleas on all counts. The legal machinery began its slow, methodical process. The case attracted significant media attention across Florida and beyond. It had every element that captured public fascination: domestic violence, hidden sexuality, family tragedy, dramatic rescue. Cable news programs dissected the psychology behind it. Online true crime communities debated motives and warning signs. But for Elena and Marco, the media circus was just another burden to bear. Reporters camped outside their home, called their phones, approached relatives for interviews. They declined all requests, wanting only privacy to heal and focus on the children who needed stability more than ever. Elena spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from dehydration, minor injuries, and severe psychological trauma. Doctors recommended intensive therapy, both individual and family-based. She began sessions with a psychologist specializing in violent crime survivors, working through the layered trauma of losing her sister, being abducted, and facing her own mortality. The nightmares came every time she closed her eyes. She saw Gabe's face, smelled the gasoline, felt the zip ties cutting into her wrists. Sleep became something to fear rather than seek. The children struggled in their own ways. Isabella withdrew further, speaking only when necessary, spending hours in her room with the door closed. The middle children, 11-year-old Diego and 9-year-old Camilla, developed anxious behaviors, checking locks repeatedly and asking where adults were going every time someone left the house. 6-year-old Lucia began having panic attacks at bedtime, convinced that bad men were coming. 5-year-old Sophia stopped speaking entirely for 2 weeks, communicating only through gestures and tears. Marco and Elena enrolled all 6 children in trauma-focused therapy, driving them to appointments 3 times weekly. Meanwhile, Detective Brennan and her team built their case. They compiled evidence methodically: security footage, witness statements, forensic reports, phone records. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Dalton, prepared for what she knew would be a complex trial. Gabe's defense attorney, a public defender named Robert Harrison, had already indicated plans to argue diminished capacity due to psychological distress. He would claim that Gabe's actions stemmed from a mental health crisis, triggered by the exposure of his sexuality and the dissolution of his marriage. It was a strategy that infuriated Marina's family, but had legal precedent. In September, Elena met with Dalton to prepare for her testimony. The prosecutor's office was located in downtown Orlando, a modern building with harsh fluorescent lighting and walls decorated with plaques and certificates. Dalton, a woman in her early 40s with steel-gray eyes and a reputation for aggressive prosecution, walked Elena through what to expect. The trial would likely occur in early 2025, giving both sides time to prepare. Elena would need to testify about her relationship with Marina, the conversations they had about leaving Gabe, the warnings she had given her sister. She would also need to describe her own abduction and captivity in explicit detail. The prospect terrified Elena. Facing Gabe in a courtroom, having him watch her testify, reliving those hours bound in the abandoned house while he poured gasoline around her. But Dalton was clear. Without Elena's testimony, the prosecution's case for premeditation in the kidnapping charge would be weaker. Her words would help ensure that Gabe spent the rest of his life in prison. Elena agreed to do whatever was necessary. She owed that much to Marina, to the children, to every woman who had suffered at the hands of a man who believed control was love. As fall arrived, the family attempted to establish new routines. The children returned to school, though their teachers were briefed on their situation and instructed to watch for concerning behaviors. Elena returned to work part-time, finding that the structure and normalcy helped more than staying home, dwelling on trauma. Marco took a leave of absence from his job as a project manager to be more present for the family. They moved through days with forced optimism, celebrating small victories like Sophia speaking again or Isabella smiling at a joke. But beneath the surface, grief and anger simmered. Marina's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Gabe, knowing they would likely never collect, but needing some form of legal acknowledgement beyond the criminal case. Friends organized memorial fundraisers to help with the children's ongoing therapy costs and future education expenses. The community support remained strong, But Elena felt the weight of being the surviving sister, the one who got rescued, while Marina lay in a cemetery. Survivor's guilt was a concept she understood intellectually, but felt viscerally every time she looked at her nieces and nephew. In October, prosecutors revealed additional evidence that deepened the horror of Marina's murder. Digital forensics had recovered deleted files from Gabe's phone, showing he had researched methods for killing someone quickly and covering up evidence. Browser history showed searches for how long does it take police to respond, states without death penalty, and surviving after shooting someone. The searches dated back to April, weeks before Marina's death, proving that Gabe had been planning violence even while promising to work on their marriage. The revelation confirmed what Eleanor had suspected. Marina never had a chance. The moment she discovered his secrets and refused to keep them, her fate was sealed. The evidence also revealed Gabe's movements during the 3 months between murders. He had been systematically stalking not just Elena, but other family members, photographing their homes, documenting their schedules. Police found a notebook in the abandoned house containing detailed observations about Elena's routine, Marco's work hours, even the children's school drop-off times. He had been planning the kidnapping for weeks, waiting for the right moment when Elena would be alone and vulnerable. The premeditation was undeniable and chilling. As the holidays approached, the family faced the first Thanksgiving and Christmas without Marina. They gathered at Elena's house, trying to maintain traditions while acknowledging the absence that filled every room. Marina's chair at the table remained empty, a silent testament to what had been stolen. The children opened presents on Christmas morning with muted enthusiasm, their joy tempered by the knowledge that their mother would never see them grow up, graduate, marry, or have children of their own. Elena took photos obsessively, documenting everything, knowing these children would one day want proof that they had been loved and celebrated despite the tragedy that had reshaped their lives. In January 2025, as the trial date was set for March, Elena received a letter. It came through her attorney rather than directly, a safety precaution given the circumstances. The letter was from Gabe. In it, he apologized. He claimed to feel remorse for what he had done to Marina, acknowledged that his actions toward Elena were indefensible, and expressed hope that someday the children might understand he had loved them despite everything. The letter felt obscene to Elena, this attempt at redemption from a man who had murdered her sister and tried to burn her alive. She threw it away without finishing it, refusing to let him contaminate her healing process with his self-serving narrative. The trial loomed ahead, unavoidable and necessary. Elena steeled herself for what was coming, knowing the testimony would be brutal but essential. Justice for Marina demanded it. Protection for future victims required it. And somewhere in the telling, in the public accounting of what Gabe had done, there might be a form of closure. Not healing exactly, but perhaps the beginning of learning to live with a wound that would never fully close. The trial of Gabriel Reyes began on March 3, 2025, in the Volusia County courtroom, packed with journalists, victim advocates, and family members. Judge Patricia Morrison presided, her reputation for running efficient proceedings preceding her. Jury selection took 3 days, with prosecutors and defense attorneys questioning potential jurors about their views on domestic violence, mental health, and the death penalty. The final panel consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging from a retired school teacher to a young engineer, each sworn to decide Gabe's fate based solely on evidence presented. Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Dalton delivered an opening statement that laid out the prosecution's case with clinical precision. She described Marina as a loving mother and dedicated nurse, whose only crime was discovering her husband's secret life and wanting to leave. She walked jurors through the evening of May 21st, the argument, the chase into the backyard, the 7 shots that ended a life. Then she detailed the 3 months Gabe spent evading capture while planning his next act of violence against Elena, the sister who had dared to help Marina escape. Dalton's voice remained steady, but her words painted a picture of calculated cruelty that left several jurors visibly shaken. Defense attorney Robert Harrison countered with a narrative of mental breakdown. He didn't deny that Gabe had killed Marina or kidnapped Elena. Instead, he argued that years of internal conflict about his sexuality, combined with the shame of exposure in a conservative community, had triggered a psychological crisis that diminished his capacity for rational thought. He promised expert testimony from psychologists who would explain how trauma could lead to catastrophic decisions. It was a sympathetic framing that made some observers uncomfortable, seeming to excuse violence with victimhood. The prosecution called witnesses systematically. Police officers described the crime scene. Medical examiners detailed Marina's injuries. Neighbors testified about hearing gunshots and children screaming. Marina's co-workers painted a portrait of a woman who had become increasingly fearful in the weeks before her death. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an overwhelming narrative of premeditated murder followed by attempted murder. On the trial's 8th day, Eleanor took the stand. She wore a navy blue dress, her hair pulled back, her face carefully composed. Dalton guided her through testimony with practiced gentleness, establishing her relationship with Marina, the conversations about leaving Gabe, the discovery of his double life. Elena's voice remained steady as she described receiving the threatening photo of her house, the growing fear the morning she was taken from a gas station parking lot. When she recounted the hours bound in the abandoned house, the gasoline being poured, Gabe's dead-eyed stare as he prepared to light the match, several jurors looked away. Harrison's cross-examination attempted to portray Eleanor as someone who had interfered in a marriage she didn't fully understand, who had encouraged Marina to leave rather than seek counseling. But Elena didn't waver. She looked directly at Harrison and said Marina had sought counseling. Gabe had refused to participate. Marina had tried to save the marriage. Gabe had continued lying. The choice to leave wasn't impulsive. It was survival. Harrison had no effective response. The defense presented its case over 4 days. Psychologists testified about identity crisis and acute stress disorder. Gabe's former co-workers described him as a good worker who kept to himself. His mother, elderly and crying, begged the jury for mercy, claiming her son had been a good boy who made terrible mistakes. But nothing could erase the premeditation documented in phone searches, the stalking behavior, the calculated abduction. When Gabe himself took the stand, his testimony felt hollow. He expressed remorse, but couldn't explain why he had researched murder methods weeks in advance, or why he had planned to burn Elena alive if he truly regretted his actions. Closing arguments came on March 21st. Dalton reminded jurors that mental distress didn't justify murder. Millions of people struggled with identity and shame without killing anyone. Gabe had made choices at every step: to retrieve his gun, to chase Marina, to pull the trigger 7 times, to stalk Elena, to abduct her, to prepare an execution. Those were decisions, not symptoms. Harrison pleaded for understanding, arguing that imprisonment for life without possibility of rehabilitation served no purpose. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. On March 23rd, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping with intent to commit murder, weapons charges. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for April 10th. At that hearing, Elena delivered a victim impact statement. She spoke directly to Gabe, describing how his violence had destroyed not just Marina, but an entire family's sense of safety. She described children who woke screaming, who feared every stranger, who would grow up without their mother because his ego couldn't survive exposure. She told him he had taken everything from them, but he would not take their future. They would heal, they would thrive, and they would remember Marina not for how she died, but for how she lived. Judge Morrison sentenced Gabe to life in prison without parole for Marina's murder, plus 30 years for kidnapping Elena. The sentences would run consecutively. He would die in prison, likely decades from now, forgotten by everyone except those he had harmed. As deputies led him from the courtroom in shackles, he glanced once at Elena. She stared back without flinching until he looked away. Outside the courthouse, Marina's parents held a brief press conference. They thanked the prosecutors, investigators, and everyone who had supported their family. They announced the establishment of a scholarship fund in Marina's name for nursing students. They asked that their family now be allowed to grieve privately. Elena stood beside them, Marco's hand in hers, finally allowing herself to believe it was truly over. The legal system had delivered justice. The children would grow up knowing their mother's killer had been held accountable. But justice didn't erase trauma or restore what had been lost. It simply closed a chapter, allowing a new one to begin. That evening back home, Elena gathered all 6 children in the living room. She told them their father, their uncle, would never hurt anyone again. She told them they were safe, and she told them that moving forward didn't mean forgetting Marina. It meant honoring her by living fully, by refusing to let violence define them, by choosing love over fear every single day. They sat together until late into the night, crying and talking and slowly, tentatively, beginning to imagine a future built not on tragedy, but on resilience.